talking about games that are hypotheticals, maybe one day might come out. I wanted to shift over to Halo Infinite. So Sean Murray at The Gamer was released an article talking about um, production within Halo Infinite and how it's slightly problematic in the sense that they are dealing with crunch and they're having to redesign the game several times. So Sean writes, I'm just trying to pull it up here. Um, so back in 2019, 343 Industries, Bonnie Ross told the Academy of Interactive Arts and Science that Halo Infinite's development was slow and deliberate in order to avoid creating the same sort of crunch conditions that produced Halo 4 and Halo 5. Now we're finding out that despite the delay, Halo Infinite's development is being just as crunchy as its predecessors. And this is also to mention that Halo basically was supposed to be out around the time the Xbox came out.
It was supposed to be launched.
It was delayed for a year, so I mean they've had some runway. But he continues. That's according to Reset Era user translating a video on Chinese social media site Bilibili. I'm not familiar with it. From someone claiming to have worked at 343 Industries. He goes on further to say, additionally, the former 343 employee talked about the disastrous demo from last summer that led to Halo Infinite's extended delay into 2021. He called company executives overly ambitious in wanting to create both a new game engine and a semi-open world game at the same time. This meant that resources were constantly being swapped back and forth as engine defects were discovered and needed to be corrected. The engine itself can largely be blamed for Halo Infinite's poor demo performance last year, and the engine hadn't been fully completed yet. Lots of content was cut from the single player and multiplayer games in order to get the game content complete back in January. In fact, I think it's a finished product will be great. The story is a big improvement and the gameplay is much richer, though the development cycle is too long. Don't expect to be an epoch-making masterpiece. Adam, is Halo Infinite in trouble?
I think the answer to that question was already made when it didn't make launch.
Okay.
Now the question is more, how much in trouble is Halo Infinite going to be? I think the answer is the longer that this takes, the more I think people should be worried. And I know a lot of people sit back and be like, well, if they're taking extra time to get stuff done, that should be a good thing, right? It should in theory, but we are not talking, a random indie studio. We're not talking like an outside third-party publisher. We're talking Microsoft and its flagship.
Yeah.
This is something that that they've been planning for a while. This is something that they wanted to get out there as soon as possible. And not only is it falling behind, but it seems like they're doing extra work, which honestly, I've started to realize that when things are getting crunched, that usually means they're not close to launch. It usually means they're way behind or something's gone horribly wrong.
Yeah, I don't think, for me, I'm in the same boat. I think there is some reason to be concerned with Halo Infinite. I don't think crunch is necessarily an indication that a game is going to be bad. It is an unfortunate aspect of the industry, but I mean, there's crunch in any project before you get it done. I think the issue here is that they had such a long, they extended it for a year. So it sounds like there was a lot of problems at the beginning if they were going to extend it for a year and they're still having to do crunch. I think back to The Last of Us, and that game got delayed after delay after delay, and look how much better it came. But I think there's a difference between, hey, we have a finished product and we just need to fine tune it, and what I'm hearing here is sounds like there's fundamental issues that they've had to fix, and it's taking longer than they had anticipated. So it doesn't sound like the game that was going to launch was in a good position. The fact that they say, they're building a new engine in a semi-open world environment, those are two big changes for a franchise, and there's a learning aspect to either one of those. And the fact that you're now having a 1-year delay and a crunch, kind of not a good sign for the game.
Yeah, and it doesn't help too that, like you said, they're doing a system that's completely different from what Halo's known to be for. I mean, granted, it's not like Halo's new to, or Halo. Yeah, sorry, my brain is all over the place right now. It's not like Halo has never had large levels, but the difference is now this is one massive map, and it seems like it shouldn't be too difficult when you really think about it because so many games do it now. But this is still a company that might have never had to engage in something like that before, and all the things they have to fine-tune, like enemy spawns and weapon placements and all these things. So, not to mention any bugs that come out of open world games, because open world games have no history of ever being buggy as hell. Never.
Yeah.
It's not like we had a recent example where it literally got taken off of Sony source shelves and got a bunch of refunds for it. I was going to get Cyberpunk in there at some point. You know it. But it's not like there isn't a history of it. I mean, think of any Assassin's Creed game. Any like just all these kinds of games are just rife with bugs. And when you are making a game that is no longer a linear, like even if the level is really wide open, it's still linear in the fact of where you got to go. Now all of a sudden, the developers are having to account for all these different decisions that a player is going to make. That is not unlike what they would do if you put them in this level and just say, okay, here's your objective. At some point, you got to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Now the game is like, well, I mean, you can do whatever you want. I mean, there's this thing here, there's this thing here, there's that thing there, and there's 20,000 other things you can do. And they'll be like, okay, but I want to do this, but I want to get to that to get to do this. And they're like, oh, shit, we didn't account for that.
Yeah.
So when you hear, and I guess it depends, because you're right. Last of Us Part 2 got a lot of flack for crunch, too, with Naughty Dog. And it obviously turned out to be, well, to most people, the masterpiece that, a lot of people hoped it was going to be.
You know what? Regardless of like what you thought of the game, like you have to recognize like this like not the skill or success, but you have to respect what it is. Like whether you like the game or not, it is a successful.
I mean, it's the fact that enough people decided to say that it was, and it sold really well. So I mean, despite what anybody says about any game, if it sells well, it's gonna like. Look, I'm not gonna sit here and say Fortnite is a piece of shit. I may not like it, but I mean, look how many people play it. So clearly it's doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
And with Last of Us Part 2, it just comes down to, I think, the difference between this and Halo Infinite is that Last of Us 2 wasn't seeking to reinvent itself. It just seems like it was perfecting it. Mm-hmm. Whereas Halo Infinite seems like a completely different step.
Yeah.
And I think that's what doesn't help. It's probably the same reason of why Cyberpunk had a lot of issues. Final Fantasy 15 had a big problem with that, where literally the game had to get made again in 2 years because just it kept falling behind, and they eventually said, we got to put something out. And they did so many different ideas about it that didn't work out. Same would go for, I can't believe I just had it on the tip of my tongue and I blanked on it. Mass Effect Andromeda, same deal. Trying to do something completely different. It was supposed to be procedurally generated worlds, and that didn't work out. And obviously they had to crunch really fast there too. I think when I meant to say like crunch seems to be a bad sign, it's usually when it's a game doing something different from its predecessor.
Yeah.
Because any example that I've ever seen of that, to my memory, has always resulted in a bad product coming out. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say Halo Infinite's going to be a bad product, but I think my worry now is it's not going to be what I think a lot of people are hoping it's going to be. And especially because they're waiting longer for it, it's only going to compound how disappointing that's going to feel when it ends up being, I don't know, a 7.5 to an 8,
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the issue is that a lot of people are banking and waiting because there hasn't been a huge Xbox, exclusive. And so a lot of people, I think,
even think there has been one if you're not counting like re-releases or like driving games, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, like there hasn't been like the exclusive. Like there's been next gen games, but not that exclusive. And so I think there's a lot riding on Halo, and I think people are going to be disappointed. Like the fact that we haven't seen anything either since they've gone into, like, have we seen anything else since? Like I think they had that bad demo and then they went back underground, and I'm surprised that they haven't kind of resurfaced and been like, hey, look, here's where the game is. Like we're improving on it. So
yeah, no, it's been not great.
So what do you think this means for Xbox if, Halo kind of falls flat?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, how many games have failed and then people come back and keep playing it? I mean, I'm a Final Fantasy fan. I'm still going to take a look at 16. I haven't liked a Final Fantasy game since, I don't know, 10, 10-2. I mean, I'm okay with 12, but I think the core will always be there. And if you're an Xbox gamer, you're always looking forward to a Halo game because you have to. It's like the big thing. It's like now Gears of War is similar to that. Like, how many Gears of War games do we need? But people are going to have to be excited about a Gear 6 because at this point, apart from whatever's third party, like exclusive wise, there isn't much. I mean, let's be honest, like Fable's a thing that I know people are excited about, but if you go back and play the 3 games, like they're not amazing. They're okay. But they're not like shining stars. But again, because Xbox has that underwhelming exclusive market, unlike Sony, who, and I'm not trying to be a fanboy here, but Sony's clearly got the exclusives that are at the highest of octane. It's you kind of, if you're an Xbox owner and solely an Xbox owner, you kind of have to, accept if maybe Halo Infinite doesn't end up being remotely as good as you want it to, that Okay, well that's the one bad one. I'll just have to look forward to the next thing they do because hopefully they'll learn the lesson there.
Yeah, I think there is a lot riding on Halo Infinite in that Sony has their brand of exclusives, and like those exclusives, whether you're into them or not, whether you like them or not, like you can't deny that, they're impressive and they are, you know, everyone stops when Sony drops an exclusive. And so I think if Halo comes out and it's lackluster, I think that's a really bad look for Xbox, just in the fact that this is their largest flagship series and it's, not bad, but just mediocre or just good at best.
It just shows once
Uh,
again that like what Xbox Series X is right now is more a bang for your buck rather than a quality system. Because I mean,
yeah.
Sony already has them beaten the exclusive because they have the Demon Souls remake.
Mhm.
So they've already got one, and we're not even counting like I guess like things like Bugsnax and stuff that have managed to impress a little bit anyway. But I mean, Ratchet and Clank's going to be out very soon, and that could possibly really tip the scales again in their favor if it ends up being really well done.
Yeah.
So Xbox not having really anything at this point because I'm not keep royally keeping up with Xbox. Like I'm not all over their stuff.
Mhm.
But to my knowledge, because I don't hear a lot of people talking about anything coming out for it, I don't know what that next exclusive is right now on the docket. So
Yeah.
they're kind of in this weird area where it's like, yeah, they're putting all this cool stuff on Game Pass right now, including mooching off a Sony property. No thanks to MLB deciding to make it so, but
Yeah.
it's still like, okay, it's really cool that I can play these games like Outriders and MLB The Show right on day one on this really cheap subscription. But at some point, Microsoft has got to wow me with something beyond that. You can't just keep going, all right, here's this from this studio that, we gave some money to give us this availability for. It's like, okay, guys, but you got to show us what this console is worth. It can't just be like a Netflix gaming console because, as much as I'm sure a lot of people love that, it's not as easy to brag about. And I think that's what a core of the gaming audience likes to do. They like to say that our console's got the better games. And if Microsoft isn't even putting a hat in, or I guess something into the ring, like they're not even putting a competitor in, you're
Mhm.
basically giving it to Sony or even Nintendo for that matter, of just being like, see, we got the exclusives going, right?
Well, I think you open yourself up to a casual gaming market, and that's not necessarily a bad thing in doing that. But I think not having an exclusive, you don't have people like, you or I who, or even our listeners, like the people who are listening to podcasts about video games. Like they're not going to say, yeah, they don't have a lot of exclusives, but I like the fact that I can get Game Pass and I can play, you know, games that are a year or two older and get them for free. Like the people who like the first adopters are going to be the ones who want that cutting edge brand new stuff. They're not going to wait for games to just kind of show up on in a that are older. And I think Xbox needs to show that, PlayStation is not the only one that has these massive, blockbuster exclusives. And I think that's what's riding on Halo. Unless they start, firing on all cylinders with Bethesda and their games and such. Like I think that's an issue that Xbox has. So
Well, there is
I
the
think the
rumor that
pressure is huge.
Starfield's going to show up, so.
Yeah, I mean,
Which
we'll
I
see.
keep sitting there and being like, look, if Starfield is coming out this year, why the hell haven't you announced that? The fact that we don't
Mhm.
even know what Starfield is still in May, if it's coming out this year, that's a problem.
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at what they did with what Bethesda did with the Fallout for, hey, it's June, it comes out in September kind of E3 drop. But you have to remember that Fallout is a massive, well-known IP
Yeah.
that you don't need to explain to people what Fallout is. But I think with something like Starfield, I don't know what Starfield is. I don't recognize Starfield. So for me, like you can say it and be like, okay, yeah, that's cool, but like you haven't generated that hype yet that you can with a franchise that is well known.
Not to
Even if it was
mention that,
something,
like with the track record that Bethesda has, like, is a new IP something people are ready for from a company that can't even get their own core titles down right now?
yeah, and that's the other thing is that you need to show me not only that, hey, Starfield is worth your time, but this game itself, like we've put the time in to make a solid game. Now, going back to one of our episodes, like I do think, Bethesda going, solo and becoming an exclusive will help them in that they can build an engine that works exclusively on one console. They don't have to balance it on a bunch. But yeah, I think Microsoft, if not Halo, they need to have something coming out soon to justify why you need to drop for an Xbox.
I mean, look, they're not in trouble. They're in no trouble. They
No.
got fuck you money. They're good. They can do whatever they want.
Mhm.
The difference is whether or not you want this to be profitable, because as we said before on the show, if it's just about Game Pass, you're not making money.
Yeah.
So if you really want to tip the scales, you got to have some good games. It can't just be a good deal. A good deal is great for so long until you have to stop making that deal.
Yeah, and I mean, no, I'm not trying to say that like Microsoft and Xbox itself is riding on Halo, but it's not if it's not going to drive consoles. Like, yeah, they have a war chest, but if you're not making money, you're losing money, basically.
Well, I could almost argue that they are banking on Halo because what else is coming?
Yeah. Well, this raises the question then. Is like, what was the plan? Like, let's assume that Halo came out when Xbox came out. What would they have had for the next year? Like,
oh, you could easily throw like extra content into that game. If it's open world, you could definitely do more. If we're talking game wise, though, I don't know. Like, I feel like it's an inconsequential argument right now to go on because we're dealing with a pandemic and everything's so behind. I'm pretty sure that we probably, like, if this was a non-pandemic 2020, 2021, I don't think we're having any of these conversations because all this stuff's on schedule, hopefully. So I God only knows like how many games that are going to probably not be out until next year would have been out either this year or late last year if everything was the way that it was supposed to be. It's so hard to tell.